My mom divorced my dad, took $500,000 from him, and stole 40K dollars from me. I don't know how or when it all started. A few years ago, my family was a happy all-American household. I, at the time, 17M, had 3 sisters and my 2 parents. My parents had been sleeping separately for some time and claimed it was due to my father's snoring habits. After a year and a half of that, all of a sudden during dinner one night, my mother stood up and announced she had something to say. She went on to tell all of us that she felt she wasn't part of our family. My siblings and I were always out of the house for various reasons, and the intimacy between my father and her had turned into a passionless contract marriage. My mother, since marrying my father, was a stay-at-home mom. She then went on to announce that my parents were going to divorce in the next few months and that we needed to decide which parent we wanted to live with. After a month went by, my oldest sister, 19, moved out and in with her fiancé. At the same time, my 2 younger sisters, 14, 12, decided they were taking my mother's side and staying with her. Originally, I said I wanted to stay in my childhood home and finish out my senior year of high school in my hometown. All of a sudden, my father took me aside one night and told me my mother had stated she did not want me in the house and cannot take care of me and my siblings at the same time. This struck me hard, as I had never even noticed my mother wanted nothing to do with me. He asked me where I wanted to move and assured me he will make the effort to support my decision. I chose to move a few towns over, approximately 45 minutes away, to a new town. After the move, a few months went by without me ever talking to my mother, and school was about to start. This was in 2014 when Bitcoin started rocketing in value. When I was a sophomore in high school, a friend of mine discovered we could purchase various items online using Bitcoin. You can use your imagination as to what they were. And he had passed suddenly and unexpectedly, leaving a few $1,000s of cheap, useless Bitcoin in a joint wallet. Once I saw all the Bitcoin news, I figured out how to access the wallet and realized there was roughly $300K worth in the wallet. I quickly figured out how to liquidate it. All my life, I only ever had one bank account that I would cash my measly part-time bagger cashier checks into and pay my phone bill through. So I decided to put $50K into the account for safekeep and hid the other amount in a shoebox in my room. Bitcoin was still sketchy, and I was worried the cash would be seized. But since I never changed my address when I moved at my bank, they kept sending my statements to my old house where my mother and sisters lived. Almost half a year passed, and I'm about to begin my 2nd semester of 12th grade. When reality set in, I was going to need to pay for college and a place to live upon graduation. As my father had informed me, the month after I graduate, I need to move out. Before you attack him, I wasn't the best child, but while living with him, he rarely came around the house. And I would only see him once or twice a month, as his lifestyle had changed to drinking every night and staying with his girlfriends. I don't blame him. So with reality bearing down on me, I decided to consolidate my assets and set up a plan. I still had roughly $200K from the cash I stashed away and wanted to invest that money while living off the $50K plus another $20K I had managed to save up in my account. This was when I made a call to the bank to have my address changed so I can start tracking my account. Upon calling them, I was given information that felt like a cold bucket of water being dumped on my head. The balance, by my calculation, should have been close to $75K, enough to buy a new vehicle and lease an apartment by my school of choice, as well as pay for my tuition. The man that took my call informed me my account was at a balance of $12K, with monthly withdrawals ranging between 5 to 7K, with 1 month being close to 15K. I was speechless. I immediately told him to freeze the account and send me statements so I can file for fraud. A week goes by and I received the statements in the mail and called the fraud department. After having a short conversation with them, they informed me all withdrawals were made by unauthorized persons on the account. How could I have never known? The account was a youth account that required a legal adult to be on there. The legal adult was no other than my mother. I had never told my parents about the money I got from cryptocurrency and had planned to basically disappear, graduate college, and move far away. I didn't know what to do. If I went to my father, I was afraid he was going to get mad at me and report the cash to the police. He was deathly afraid of any illegal activities, or kick me out on the spot as I had turned 18 recently. So I decided to show up to my mother's house unannounced. Upon arriving at my mother's house, the door was locked, but her and her boyfriend's vehicles were there. I beat on the door until she yelled back, "She doesn't want me there," and that if I didn't leave, she would call the police. I immediately realized she knew exactly what she had done, and I went into a fit of rage. As I stood there beating down the door in a teary fit, she was actively screaming at me to leave, and that she never wanted anything to do with me. I finally snapped and yelled back that I would get her back for what she did. I then got back in my car and left. On my way home, I was called by the local police department from my hometown and asked to go there immediately for questioning. I complied in hopes I could bring the theft of my money into light and have it returned to me. When I arrived, there was a police officer outside taking pictures of one of my mother's wheels, and I knew she had done something to make the police get involved. An officer, also a family friend, came out and escorted me inside to a room where my mother was sitting on the other side of a glass wall. He told me my mother was requesting a restraining order against me for herself and my two younger sisters. He then stated that according to my mother, before I got to my childhood home, her vehicle was all in order, and after I left, some of the lug nuts on her driver's side wheel had been loosened. What the fuck? And I told him I had nothing to do with it. He then showed photos of small dents on my mother's front door from me beating on it in anger, to which I admitted was myself, and that she had stolen thousands of dollars out of my account. My mother, in an angry panic, immediately interjected and said that she had put that money in there and she had been using that to pay the mortgage and tend for my siblings, as she was searching for a job at the time. She claimed she was the account holder and that it was money from the divorce settlement. The police took a look at the statements I had in the car and disagreed that the money was in fact deposited by me, but because it was a youth account and she was an account holder, that she legally had the right to use it as she pleased. I was so defeated I didn't know what else to say, so I sat silently. I was given documents to sign and told I had a court date in 2 weeks for the restraining orders to be finalized. Until then, I had a no-contact order between my mother and younger sisters. After leaving, I withdrew the remaining balance of $7,289.30. She had gone and unfroze the account, as well as made another $5,000 withdrawal. Defeated, I simply waited for my court date. 2 weeks goes by and I arrive to court. After the opening information is presented, the judge begins to go over the why for the order. He says my mother claims I had threatened her life and her assets, as well as threatened my younger sisters via text and phone calls. All not true. But thankfully, after reading this, he asked for her evidence, which she could not provide, and dismissed that information. Upon dismissing this information, he stated that he can issue a restraining order for my mother, but cannot issue one for my younger sisters unless they request it. So my younger sisters are called upon to stand up while my mother is whispering things into their ears, likely attempting to manipulate them. My whole life I was very close with my middle sibling, 15 now, and she burst out crying in pain that my mother was a liar and that she was stealing from me and that she missed me dearly. She said she doesn't want a restraining order and wished things would just go back to normal. My baby sister followed suit and cried out that this was terrible and that she didn't want to be a part of the family anymore. After the judge was able to silence them, he asked them to step outside. He told my mother he doesn't know what this is all about and that he hates the idea of forcing a family to split by court order, but he is required to approve her restraining order for a minimum of 1 year. He also stated that the restraining order requested for my siblings was denied. As we're leaving the courtroom, the last thing my mother said to me for the next 3 years was, "This is all your fault. I needed that money to care for your sisters and keep the house. When you grow up one day, you'll understand I did what was best for all of you." I simply told her back, "You did what was best for you, not what's best for me. You're not my mother, and from this day on, you'll never see me again." Part 2. My mom divorced my dad, took $500,000 from him, and stole $40K plus from me. Part 2. To those wondering, yes, this is all 100% true, and there is more to the story. That night, I got home to my dad's empty house with no lights on. He was off on one of his benders with one of his girlfriends, I assumed, so I just went straight to bed instead of trying to process everything that had happened. My little sisters had texted me about a dozen times saying they wanted to move into my dad's house, but I knew that if they knew how our father was living, they wouldn't be able to deal with that as well. An average night at my father's was getting some cheap food from the grocery store where I worked and coming home to an empty house. The fridge on average only had a small carton of milk and a package of bologna and cheese. He didn't shop for the house much, since that was what my mother would do for the household, so I would fend for myself. A couple weeks went by and I was carefully researching how to get my money back and speaking with a couple lawyers, most of which were no help. I finally accepted the fate of my situation and shrugged it off. My friend who had basically left this money for me in his passing was my best friend I'd ever had. I still think about him to this day and leave birthday wishes on his Facebook. Nowadays, it's just me and his GF at the time that still leaves birthday posts or random posts on his page, which has been nothing but emotionally exhausting to watch him disappear as a person. Knowing that money was all I had left of him cut me deeper than losing my relationship with my thieving mother. I decided to liquidate the remaining $200K, which at that point had gained a little more value, and cashed out around $240K, and was able to open my own account, thank God, to deposit it into since I was now 18. During this time, there was no regulating for cryptocurrency, so there were no questions asked by the bank. A few months go by and my high school graduation came. The only people that showed up was my father and my youngest sister, as well as my girlfriend at the time. To put into perspective, I have a very large family on either sides of the family, and they all lived locally. My older sister's graduation, at least 10 family members showed up, but not for my graduation. My graduation gift from my father was a letter that I still have tucked away in my safe that says, "Congratulations, you can stay at home for free if you go to college," so I decided to accept his offer. A year and a half go by and my older sister, 22 at the time, decided to get married. I had never flown before, so I decided to make a 14-hour drive to the venue. This is important later, with my little sister 17 at the time and cousin 20 AF. My mother was obviously at the wedding, however, the entire time I didn't even let myself get within 20 feet of her. It had been almost 3 years since we spoke, and I liked it that way. On the day of the wedding, I was told by the hotel I had got myself and allowed my little sister to share with me. I got a very large room on purpose since I treated this like a vacation. That the room was closed down and I needed to vacate the premises after grabbing my luggage with an escort from the management. When we went in there, my room reeked of pot, and my sister admitted she smoked in the bathroom. When I went into the bathroom, I saw her weed and flushed it immediately. My little sister went crying to my mom and dad and told them that I flushed it. Me thinking my straight-edge father would have my back, I was wrong to think so. My father berated me and told me my sister needed it to function. What the fuck? And that I was in the wrong and needed to go find her some more. What the fuck? And I declined to do so. He then proceeded to take a moment to think. My father was always a very stern person and punished us both physically and mentally. After careful consideration, he pointed in my face and said, "Your shot better be out of the house by the time I get home from this wedding. I don't care if you're still in school, have fun being homeless." I was in shock. I never expected this to blow up the way it did over some marijuana, which was at the time illegal in both our home state and the state of the wedding. Did I mention this all unfolded at the wedding venue in front of the entire family of mine, as well as my brother-in-laws? After that, I decided I wasn't staying the last 2 days after the wedding that was meant for the two families to bond and enjoy the local festivities going on. After the wedding, I stayed for a couple hours to try and get my older sister alone to apologize and give her my gift. Finally, I got her alone and went to apologize. She was never heavily involved in my life. There were times I wasn't sure she even knew I existed. But before I could say anything, she interjected and told me I have nothing to apologize for. She told me she knows our family is a mess and apologized for leaving when she did, and that she needed to do what was best for her. I don't blame her. She went on to tell me that our mother had asked her for money in the beginning and suddenly didn't need any help, but didn't know until recently that it had been mine that she stole. I handed her an envelope with a couple $1,000s in it and told her I loved her and hoped that helps with some of the wedding expenses. She had an amazing wedding, the type you see on magazine covers, and she hugged me crying and wished me luck. I left straight from the wedding still in my suit and drove 14 hours home, only stopping for gas in the bathroom as I calculated how I would move my things and continue my life without my family. My father still had no idea I had all that money in a savings account and figured I was just as broke as any 20-year-old college student. Figures. The reflection in his voice seemed he had been planning to use the next problem that came up as an excuse to kick me out. I got home and rented a U-Haul, packed all my belongings and called a friend. His mother lived alone in a very large house, and he had told me she was struggling to pay the mortgage. The house was previously a 3-story duplex, with the 3rd story being a standalone apartment, and the basement was her hair salon business. He connected me with her, and she agreed on a 1-year lease to move in, which I promptly did. For the next year, I didn't speak with a single member of my family. After I moved in with my friend's mother, things were pretty good. I decided to drop out of school and demand a full-time position from my job. My job agreed to make me full-time, which came with a raise and bonuses. My father was a store manager for a certain chain of grocery stores that I worked at, but we worked at separate locations and still weren't talking to each other. I had a couple of girls that I was dating, not intimately, and bought a new car, 2012 VW Passat SE, to attempt to feel better. I started down a path of self-destruction for the next year. I had gotten a notice from my bank out of nowhere requesting documentation from my crypto liquidation. I didn't have any idea how to get that, so I set up an appointment, and all they did was take down some notes and made me sign a form stating the money was obtained through legal means. After that, I heard nothing else from them. I began smoking pot and partying every night, waking up hungover and driving to work at 6 a.m., then rinse repeat. Keeping myself awake during the day by drinking energy drinks and coffee non-stop and eating like crap. I became skinny and sickly and slowly started to spiral out of control. One day I met a girl that pretty much saved my life. I wasn't planning on unaliving myself or anything, but I definitely wouldn't have complained if I drank a little too much or took a little too much drugs. I had become unrecognizable and slaved myself into oblivion. I was depressed and violent. I had been living with my buddy's mother in the bigger city for almost a year at this point and was hanging with plenty of lowlifes in the area. Back to the girl, she was young, redhead, green eyes. We met through a mutual friend during a hangout, and I messaged her after asking if she wanted to go on a date. After a few dates, I was infatuated. I had ceased contact with all the other women that were in my life and focused solely on her. I had asked her to be my girlfriend after a month of dating. At 2 months, I had an epiphany. I didn't want to call my mother at all. I remember visiting my father later that week and reconciling with my little sister, who apologized relentlessly and said she missed me every day. I forgave her and told her we were just kids and what happened a couple years ago wasn't going to affect the rest of our lives. That weekend, I rented a U-Haul, and my friend as well as my sister helped me move all my stuff out. The second trip back to my dad's, I sat in the back and developed a core memory watching the streetlight shadows pass through the small window in the back of the U-Haul while I contemplated what I was doing. I was about to start my life all over again for the 3rd time in the past 6 years and was afraid of what the outcome may be. But I digress. I moved all my things into my dad's and took the last 2 months before I left for basic training to reflect on myself and get back into shape. Late nights of Xbox and early mornings at the local running track kept me busy while I plotted and studied how I was going to make an impression in training. After about a month, I got a phone call from a restricted number. I answered and didn't say anything. My mother burst out in a crying voice saying, "Please don't hang up. You don't need to say anything, I just want to say something. I love you and regret all the decisions I made." I quietly listened while she spoke about her mental health declination and how it destroyed her every day not knowing where I was or what I was doing. She said she's proud of me for enlisting and had a way to make things right if I gave her a chance. I was always raised to be a kind and patient person. So after a long pause, I simply said, "I'll be at your house at 6 p.m. with my girlfriend." Then hung up. I was a stressed out mess, but I knew having my girlfriend with me would keep me level-headed, and she said if at any point I'm uncomfortable that we will just leave. I agreed, and we set off to my childhood home for the first time in 5 years. Upon arrival, my baby sister and other little sister greeted me in the driveway and said Mom was a mess and a nervous wreck. They said she wanted me to go into her bedroom alone to discuss some things and that if I wanted to leave, they don't blame me. I decided to go in against my better judgment and hear her out. I wanted my girlfriend, the girl I planned to marry, to meet my whole family, whether good or bad, since she grew up with only her father and didn't have much family of her own. What waited for me in her bedroom was something I couldn't have ever imagined. My mother was on her hands and knees bawling her eyes out. When I walked in, she leapt to her feet as if to embrace me, but I pulled back and grabbed the door. She retreated back and got back on her hands and knees. My mother, the woman who raised me, then abandoned family years before, was on the ground hands and knees crying and begging me to forgive her. I was shocked and speechless. I just stood there in shock as she went off about all her life's regrets and choices, that she suffered mentally every day since I left, and that she didn't see any way out other than using the money I had in that account. She didn't want to lose the house and wanted to prove to the world that she was her own successful person. She wanted to make it up to me and said she had a plan to do so. I told her very sternly to stand up and stop groveling. It was horribly off-putting to see my own mother like that. She stood up and I told her, even though I wasn't ready to accept her in my life as my mother, I would keep her as an acquaintance. I told her she was not invited to my basic training graduation, and I never planned to let her meet her grandchildren if I ever had any. She pleaded that acquaintances was fine for now, and that she just wants to know whether I'm safe or not. I was then introduced to her boyfriend. He was a very kind man, with the kind of eyes and soft facial expression you want to coincide with. He greeted me with a firm handshake and said he's heard a lot about me and is very excited to finally meet me. We shared some things and had good conversation over dinner. When dinner was over, I left and said I'd be in touch. As I left the driveway, I watched through the front bay window as my mother fell to her knees, holding her boyfriend the leg bawling her eyes out. That hurt me more than anything I'd experienced up to this point. My girlfriend and I had a long discussion that night about what to do and decided to give it a go. I invited my mother out to lunch if she was buying. I never planned to give her another dime, let alone even a minute of my time. At lunch, my mom kept it together, even though I could tell she wanted to lunge across the table and embrace me the entire time. Finally, she started to explain her means to repay me. She explained her and her boyfriend planned to sell the house and move to another state. I internally thought it was funny. She just wanted to leave everyone behind and live a new life like nothing happened. But then she mentioned she had a few $100,000 of equity in the home, that she would pay me back after closing the sale of my childhood home, unless I wanted to buy it, which she said if I paid off the rest of the loan, roughly $180K, that she would then gift it to me to sell for myself and keep all the profit, roughly $200K. I told her I wasn't going to trust her to make good on that, and I wasn't going to front another cent. She understood and said I will be paid back in full in the coming months. I told her even that wouldn't make up for all the time I lost. From 17-21, I sacrificed the better part of my late teens, trying to build a future on a crumbling foundation. I had no parents to turn to when I made a mistake, no one to vent to, no one who would just hug me and tell me things will get better. I grew 20 years in the span of 5 and matured too quickly to even consider myself someone's child anymore. She agreed with everything I said, and that was that. I kept in touch and even wrote her a couple letters while in basic training since I had nothing better to do. I graduated AIT after basic and left for my first duty station in Texas. I deployed 7 days after I touched down. I had married my girlfriend a week before we both shipped to basic training and didn't even get to enjoy my time with her before I was starting down a military air transport headed to the Middle East. A month after I got overseas, my wife informed me my mother mailed a check that cleared for $60K. I told her to send $13K back as that was more than she took, and I wanted to owe her 0 favors. I've been in the United States Army for almost 7 years now, and time has healed almost all. The thoughts of what she and my father did to me still sits in the back of my mind, but my family has grown since then. I have reconciled with each one of them and become much closer to family after my multiple deployments. I love my family and everything they do for me now. I have since then had a daughter of my own who is my whole world. Thank you for watching this Reddit story, you guys. If you enjoyed, please consider liking this video and subscribing.